Welcome, everybody, to Do You Even Live Here? It's a podcast with me, Dalton George, your host, also the mayor of Boone, North Carolina. I'm here with my co host, Preston Blakely, who's the mayor of Fletcher. And we've got a lot of things to talk about today. Preston, I know that you've had a busy while, and we've been talking a lot about the state. We ended last episode talking about some real negatives, but we have a positive at the start. So I'll run us through the segments we'll be going through today. I'm here in Watauga County. We opened a new school. It's the newest school that we've had in quite some time, in multi-decades. We'll be talking about that and the ongoing hurricane recovery that's a part of. We're going to talk a little bit about some union dynamics happening in the North Carolina Democratic Party, which is really interesting and timely. And then we're going to wrap up in the theme of unions about right to work, this new constitutional amendment. Again, last week we talked about one constitutional amendment we have concerns about. Believe it or not, where there's usually one problem, there's two problems. There's a second one that's coupled with it that really is near and dear to us as folks that are connected to labor and hardworking people in the state of North Carolina. But first, Preston, we got a new school here in Watauga County over in Valley Crucis. What do you think?
I'm always a big supporter of education. And so if y'all have the opportunity to open a new school, that's always a wonderful thing. And I don't know a whole lot about what's happening in Watauga County with the new school. Is it within Boomtown limits? What's the deal here?
It is not, so I cannot claim credit for it, unfortunately. If you're listening, I did not deliver a new school to Watauga County, but it's in this kind of neighboring unincorporated community called Valley Crucis. This has been a long time coming. These kids were in a substandard school as it is. Here in Watauga, we're actually a K through 8 model. I don't know if it's the same over in Henderson County.
It's
Is it?
not. No, it is
Okay,
not.
so a lot of kids, right? Everybody from
Yeah.
kindergarten to eighth grade. They were in this kind of substandard school. It was old. It was in partial floodplain, so obviously took a lot of water damage, needed a lot of love. Well, lo and behold, here comes Hurricane Helene. It was already slated for renovations and replacement ultimately, but Helene pushed those students out, and they actually finished up their school year, and they were, I believe, still in this calendar year at the local community college taking classes. So, again, we talk about hurricane relief and stuff, but you think about these mini students. One day Hurricane Helene comes, they leave their classroom, and many, in some cases, the eighth graders that graduated never made it back. But long time coming, the new school has sprung up. It is like one of the prettiest schools I've ever seen, and to a lot of fanfare from the local community, and it took a lot of work. So when we talk about things like property taxes, what your county can deliver, big shout out to the county commission for getting it done. That was a real success. And to me, right, in this theme of long-term recovery, which is replacing these facilities that were kind of holding on and were permanently removed as a result of Helene.
And I heard you say that the school was partially in the floodplain. Now, is it a brand new school that was built, or is this renovations, repairs?
So yeah, brand new school. So all the way out of the floodplain, thankfully.
Okay, that was gonna
I
be
and
my
you joked.
question.
Yeah, surely we've learned our lesson, right? And you probably, as a Western North Carolina guy, have learned quickly anything in a floodplain, even in something as innocuous sounding as the 100-year floodplain. What we've learned is that just because it's called the 100-year floodplain does not mean that it just floods once every 100 years, as we're coming to find out.
When I think about the 100-year floodplain, I always think about it in terms of like over 30 years, right? So you have a 1% chance of a flood in there in a given year, but over 30 years, that's a 30% chance. That's wildly different than a 1% chance. I don't want to be rolling the dice on a school that serves people over 30 years or even 50 years, right? These are incredibly large investments. I know in Fletcher, after the floods, the Hurricane Helene, we had an incredible discussion about what we wanted to be allowed to be built in the floodplain and what we didn't want to be allowed to be built in the floodplain, right? And so we currently have a charter school in Fletcher that is currently in the floodplain. It's right across the road from our park. It flooded out, right? And luckily, that school, Fernleaf, they had a second campus that was really on top of a mountain. And so all the kids from the lower campus moved up to their upper campus. They were able to continue going to school after Hurricane Helene. But, I think all throughout West North Carolina, we've had these conversations about what should be in a floodplain now, what shouldn't be in a floodplain now, and, really finding out what the consequences are of, some of the decisions that were made in the past. We had this on our last episode about decisions made in the past that
Right.
impact us here today. And, some of the decisions were made in the past, right? Like I didn't okay charter school being built in a floodplain here, yet it is here. And I think there's ways that we could build back better and be more strategic with our zoning, right? In our communities.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, and I mean, I think too, to your point about these flood rules and everything, and I don't know if I've ever told the story on the podcast. This is kind of jumping out of the school world a little bit, but I worked with our planning staff and our public works staff after the hurricane and went out and checked on people. There was a couple of conversations like this, but I remember one, and it was this guy, and I don't want to tell too much about him, but owned, I would characterized as a publicly facing organization, and we made them move their heating and AC unit and like elevate it because it was near floodway. And he gave us heck for it, right? Like came after us. These rules are costing me money. We went out there to check on him, and he was like, "Thank you so much for making me elevate this because it would have ruined everything I had going on." And it just shows that I think that foresight, even though in the moment you don't like this idea of, oh, I've got to put a retention pond there, or oh, I've got to elevate this, we as like local leaders and folks that are making the rules have to think about the worst case scenario.
Mother Nature remains undefeated, right? It's unreal. I'm really glad to see you all making such proactive decisions about infrastructure and the way your facilities look in Watauga. Those are the kind of decisions that, make some really profound impacts when it comes to our infrastructure, our facilities, and our communities today, right? And so we're still feeling those impacts of Helene, but I think the school is such a wonderful highlight about how to kind of move forward in a better way.
That's when people like government, right? When it's building things, when it's being proactive, when it's thinking about the future.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have an incredibly long way to go. I always think about the figure, just $60 billion, right? I mean, we don't get that money overnight. This was that 1% type of event that hit Western North Carolina, the most impactful storm to hit mainland since Hurricane Katrina. And I mean, that's profound in and of itself.
Well, and we issued a challenge last week, so I'll issue this challenge now. But this is what something that I really enjoy about having a platform like this and being able to communicate with people, and it's that recovery in this way at this scale is not a sprint, right? It's a marathon, and so much of the love and attention from people in Raleigh, from all the politicians that wanted to do the cool thing, it was right at the start, and it's tapered off. And I think it's so important for anybody with a platform, anybody that is rooted in Western North Carolina or cares about an equitable recovery process where people have a fair shake, where they're able to live a life with some dignity and get back to where they were pre-storm and be stronger and more resilient, then we need to keep the pressure up, right? Be asking your senators and House reps, and you don't have to be in Western North Carolina for people in Congress or in the state legislature to matter in terms of an equitable recovery, and ask, what are we doing now? What are we continuing to do? And there's still so many people without homes. An anecdote here in the town of Boone, I had a business owner reach out, and she was really frustrated because there was some public parking taken offline because there was a manufactured home that was about to go up into our Junaluska community, which was replacing a home lost as a result of Helene. And this business owner means well, good person, but like has been really vocal and reflecting on Helene. And the point I made was like, we're able to reflect, but there's still some people without homes as a result of Helene. And I hate that it took up, 7 or 8 parking spaces, but I think it's nice that the town is able to be a staging location for somebody to finally get back into a home of their own. And again, I think that's the dynamic between reflecting and then living in it. And again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Continue to put pressure on the folks that are making those decisions and asking the hard questions. And, just recently I was in DC talking about it, trying to get some appropriations, trying to get some support. And then you think about the folks in Batcave where we went live, like, geez, like Batcave has had enough bad luck, right? They've had enough challenges. The last thing I wanted to hear is that there's a major road failure. So yeah, anybody that's listening, continue to push for Western North Carolina.
Yeah, I'll second that. We got a long ways to go. All of West North Carolina has had a hard go at it, and we need all hands on deck to make sure that we get back to where we were and really better, right?
And I think that wraps up our first segment as we talk about ongoing recovery and new school here in Watauga County. So after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about labor in a number of ways. We're going to talk about the union situation in the North Carolina Democratic Party. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this right to work constitutional amendment that's coming down the pipeline. So stick around, y'all. This has been Do You Even Live Here?
Welcome back to Do You Even Live Here? I am Preston Blakely, the mayor of Fletcher, North Carolina, and I'm here with my buddy Dalton George, the mayor of Boone, North Carolina. And we just finished talking about a new school that was built in Watauga County, Hurricane Helene, and now we're moving towards unions. And there's a lot of conversations going around unions in North Carolina and right to work after an amendment that was essentially passed to be on the ballot this November, but also a little bit closer to political side of things. The North Carolina Democratic Party is having some interesting conversations surrounding that. And recently, just a handful of days ago, Mackenzie Reedy Bacon, who is a member of the North Carolina Democratic Party staff, made a post on Facebook. And the post says that Tuesday we walked out of the weekly all-staff meeting, and we did so because the North Carolina Democratic Party management is refusing to bargain over field staff terms after already putting those terms on the table. I don't know this issue completely completely what's happened with the North Carolina Democratic Party. But I will say that if this is the case, I would be pretty disappointed in North Carolina Democratic Party as we claim to be the party to support workers and support unions and make sure that people are taken care of, right? And what we do know to be fact is that when unions are in place, workers have more leverage. They have better pay, they have better benefits, and overall, they're just treated better. And if we claim to be the party that's a big tent that supports these folk, then perhaps they need to do a better job of supporting the union and supporting their staff members and making sure they're able to live comfortably in North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, well said, and I think, I know McKinsey well, and, McKinsey's a great organizer and has been rooted in that community a long time, so I don't really think that this is just bluster, knowing McKinsey and knowing the dedication she has to the organizing field for progressive causes in the state. So, yeah, a little troubling, and I think at the time of this recording, right, May 26th, we've not really seen any official information from the North Carolina Democratic Parties, and you're right, right? Like, it signals a weird message to folks from the outside looking in, especially when the narrative gets out there that the party is not supporting its own union. And as somebody that used to work for a what I would consider left of center, left organization, progressive organization down home North Carolina, I was a part of the union conversations there. Didn't really have capacity to be on the bargaining team or anything like that. But down home's whole thing is we're about labor, we're about working people, and those union conversations got messy, I would say. And a lot of times the folks that were bargaining and fighting for the union didn't really feel like they were being heard by management at all times. Now, ultimately, the union did get ratified. I think there's been some struggles. I've not really followed up, no longer work there. But it just goes to show sometimes the organizations and the political parties that advocate for unions struggle to implement them effectively and equitably themselves. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And it just goes to show that when you're in a state like North Carolina that's right to work, even the most pro union voices maybe don't always stick the landing on supporting unions because they're just so foreign to us in some ways, right? As folks that are deeply rooted in the state like you and I are.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Just before this recording, I was brushing up on a little bit of what I know about unions in North Carolina. And you're right, there's not a lot there. We've been a right to
Right.
work state since 1940. The one strike that I've even seen from a union came from the nurses here at HCA Mission Health in Asheville. A stat that I saw, only 2.7% of workers belong to a union in North Carolina. So virtually nobody, right? Virtually nobody at 2.7%. And so just to give you all a little bit more context, exactly by right to work, that means that you're not required to join a union in the state of North Carolina. You can't be forced to pay those fees. You can't be denied a job simply for refusing to join a union and pay those dues, right? And so this came about in the 1940s. It essentially was a way to push back on unions when unions were out there strongest in the United States. I think that's really important to point out as well. As I just stated, North Carolina only has about 2% of workers that are within unions and is the second least unionized state in the United States behind South Carolina. It's interesting because people on both sides of the aisle always point out this fact. North Carolina is consistently ranked number one for business in the United States, but are also consistently ranked pretty far, like near 50. I don't know where exactly we're at, but
We are 50.
we're are we
Best for
50?
business, worst for workers. I believe
So
that's what
that
I've heard the counter, yeah.
50th for workers, right? And so I think when we see and hear the phrase right to work, it's a bit deceitful, right? Because it almost sounds positive. But the fact of the matter is everybody has the right to work if you so choose to and you have the ability to, right? What this is doing, it's really dismantling and taking power back away from workers and I think giving it to corporations. Because when we look at states that do have really strong unions and do have really strong worker protections, those folk have much more bargaining power. They get paid more. They have better benefits. I mean, it's spelled out right in front of you why this is a benefit and why we're best for business, but worse for workers in North Carolina.
And I think that adds to the unique dynamic of watching progressive organizations struggle at implementing a union is that, and again, it's always difficult, right? Recognizing that there's going to be places you disagree. I'm not saying that anybody is bad faith or anybody is operating negatively because I'm not really privy to the conversation, right? However, it creates an additional roadblock as we're in this state trying to advocate for workers and encourage more unionization. And you have the most progressive organizations stumbling and creating this kind of outward appearance that there's not unity on some of these core principles and agreements. And that's where I think I would ask the Democratic Party as a lowly mayor in a small town far outside the triangle. I don't even get invited to some, Carolina forward cookouts. So, like Preston. So, guys, don't take my opinion too seriously. But I would say probably put out a press release and try to get Preston's dying laughing. I would say probably put out a press release and try to get ahead of it because once a narrative gets set, it's really hard to move. And so if there's another piece of the story here, or one day we're going to find alignment and make sure that all the workers for the NCDP are happy, let's get that message out there, right? Or explain the barriers as to what's going on. So that's the first piece, and I think we're going to follow this. If there's more information, it's probably worth coming back to on the podcast. Now, we're talking about this right to work constitutional amendment, and Preston was just talking about how we're a right to work state. So, for the very savvy listener out there, you might be saying, wait a second, why would you be doing a constitutional amendment to make us something that we already are? And if you thought that, congratulations, you get an A, you passed the test. There was going to be a quiz. But secondly, right, why would they do that? And I'll let Preston try to explain because it's a very strange thing to do if we already are a right to work state. So, what's the calculus there in enshrining that in our Constitution?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here, right? First and foremost, again, as we've already acknowledged, as we've already highlighted, as you said, we're already a right to work state. And that's one of the things that's already been frustrating me about these constitutional amendments. In our last episode, for our listeners, if you haven't listened, go back and listen. We talked about the property tax levy limit amendment, which the fact of the matter is, North Carolina can already do that to us if they so chose. For me, and you could tell me if I'm wrong here or wandering off, Dalton, but I think essentially this is a political tactic. That's my take on it. I think, and again, when you hear right to work, it sounds positive. It sounds like workers are winning, but I think data and other states tell us that might not be the case.
I think that that is a great assessment. I would add this makes right to work nearly impossible to ever get rid of, right? So it's a
That's right.
law. It's
It's
been a law since
enshrined.
1947. Yeah, it's enshrined. So it's like, and
Mhm.
again, to pick on our Democratic friends, we're equal opportunity. The Republicans are leading this right now. The Democrats are defending this. But if this law was a real problem, we had that legislature until 2010, right? Some of the Democrats that co sponsored legislation that did things like rent control preemption and all these really cool mechanisms that local towns would like. Some of them are currently sponsoring items to take away local government powers in a variety of ways. And so I think it's important to say, right? Like the Democrats were driving the car, the boat, whatever you want to say, for a long time between 1947 and 2010, in which they could have
That's right.
made it a better state to unionize and a better state for laborers. And they didn't. Okay. So we need to have conversations with somebody that's running for office. What are you going to do for workers? Because the Democratic Party pre 2010 did not meet the muster. And it's really easy to govern from the minority because you don't have to have any ideas because you're never going to pass anything. Don't mean that as any diss to my friends in the General Assembly, but it's easy to say this is bad and this is a great idea. It's just the reality of the situation, right? Like, I'm going to be honest. And so I think that this creates a longer conversation of are we going to meet those values, right? Whether it's within our own organizations or in our primaries or whatever, and continue to support workers in whatever way we can. And I think a lot of it's through unionization.
I think about this from a historical context. Unions have been responsible for weekends, right? Overtime pay, workplace safety standards, child labor protections. The child labor protections, y'all, like children working. I mean, you think about those really old pictures that you would see in your textbooks when you were in school of a child with coal all over their face or standing on some steel beam with no safety gear, just tight roping that bad boy. That's crazy in today's world. You would never even think about doing that. But those are the things that, unions help us to get, right? So historically, we can see those benefits today.
Well, and it's the theme, and you're absolutely right. One thing to be a little funny, we don't give the younger kids of previous generations enough credit because you always see those tweets about like I would give an 1800s kid like hot Cheetos and like a Mountain Dew and he would die. And it's like these guys were like in steel factories at 6 years old. He could tank a Mountain Dew and Cheetos. I hate to tell you, and it's like it's kind of like funny because it's so absurd now, and I think that just speaks to like the unions being this early conscious of America, right? Like we can laugh about some of these pictures because they're just so unreal, right? It's like they're almost like imaginary and they're so far removed. But it's like at a time, not only was that acceptable, but it was acceptable because it was creating profit for some like rich, dude with a literal monocle and top hat, like a real like rich dude that looks like the Monopoly man. And so it's like, again, we can laugh, but it's like the unions were our conscience. They gave us weekends, they gave us so many things. And that's where that right to work framing is more troubling. And again, this theme of constitutional amendments as being the kind of Republican playbook in the legislature has been kind of the show since 2018. And they throw all these things on to make sure that it's going to be impossible to do in the future. In 2018, they had all of those constitutional amendments. I believe it was 7 of them. The ones I remember the most were, of course, the voter ID one. And then there was one on a constitutional right to hunt and fish. And me as a fisherman and somebody as an outdoorsman, like I had a lot of concerns with that because it's like, what does that even mean as a constitutional right? Does that mean that I can walk into Fletcher with my shotgun and shoot a deer? And when the mayor comes out and goes, why did you just shoot a shotgun in the center of Fletcher? That's not cool. I go, hey man, I've got a constitutional right to hunt. Like it's, just kind of silliness in which that's why you make laws. Like you have a constitution as the framework and kind of your values. And then you go make laws on top of it. And so if an election happens and the state goes, hey, we'd like to support unions because maybe we did some press releases and talked about it appropriately. Well, guess what? You could enact a law that would do so. And so I do think the great irony of putting a constitutional amendment on the ballot and misrepresenting what it does is it's actually less democratic because it doesn't allow the legislature to create laws that respond to the current time that we're in. So very funny the way that everything shakes out. And, you're going to have a lot of things on your ballot come 2026 elections. And it's going to be tough for people that are working to put food on the table to research everything. So it's a really good strategy. And unfortunately, one that hurts the many regular people in our state.
As we wrap up here at this segment, folks, as you go out and you vote this November, just make sure you're knowledgeable about what's on the ballot. We're talking about things that are enshrined in our state constitution that are incredibly difficult to change, but will have profound impacts on North Carolina for generations, perhaps. And as we head to break in our next segment, we're going to be talking about the roadless area conservation rule, which has had some troubling items pop up on there recently, but there's some pretty cool items around it too. So thanks for listening, y'all. And we're headed to the next segment.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Do You Even Live Here? I'm Dalton George. I'm with your co-host, Preston Blakely. We're both young mayors in Western North Carolina. And the last thing we're going to talk about, this is really going to be a short segment, but we wanted to end with something. Well, it's troubling, but there's been some really positive reactions to it. So we'll start with the troubling and then we'll end with the positive. And this is probably going to be a future episode where we'll get an expert matter on it because it is so deeply rooted in its impact to Western North Carolina. And if you're in Western North Carolina, if you enjoy the outdoors, you should be concerned about the upcoming roadless rule repeal from the Trump admin. And so the roadless rule really ultimately what it does is it keeps roads out of our national forests to prevent things like logging and ATV joyrides. And national forests are incredible, right? They're huge swaths of land that provide drinking water for so many communities, habitat for a number of species like the hellbender, which we often shout out on this show. And this is a great rule that was adopted after like 600 public hearings. And now they're trying to repeal it with no public hearings. That's right, no public hearings. One of these most bedrock environmental protections for areas like Western North Carolina. And so, Preston, I've got some good news, but you and I, right? I kind of represent Pisgah if we had 2 hosts. I'm the Pisgah guy, and you're the Nantahala guy. And those are both incredible national forests that are in Western North Carolina. And I'm sure you've got a deep connection. How far is Nantahala from you?
Maybe about an hour's drive out, but right by us. And
Yeah.
anybody that's listening to this and was from the western part of the state in Henderson, Buncombe, Clay, Macon, Swain counties, right? We know how valuable and how just incredibly pristine that area is. And we want to be sure to preserve that as long as we can.
This is a public health issue. I mean, you're so right. And it's habitat, it's drinking water, it's cultural. And right now, the Roadless Rule protects 59 million acres of national forests. Okay. And so this is troubling because this admin has been really doing a lot of attacks on wildlife and natural spaces. But the good news, right, is we all own this land. And so we all have a stake in it. Over in Buncombe County, shout out Buncombe, right next to Henderson, the commissioners actually adopted a resolution in support of the roadless rule and against this proposed repeal. I'm working on one here in Boone. Any government that's even close to a national forest should consider doing so. And then a local organization to Western North Carolina, Mountain True, and its Riverkeeper constituency, they're hosting public hearings across the state. They're having their own public hearings. They're having one in Boone coming up at the public library on May 29th, also my 27th birthday, shout out, from 6 to 8 at the public library. And that is in like like we have to show up, we have to make noise, and we've won before, right? We won on public lands. Everybody remembers getting on Instagram and seeing they're trying to sell your public lands. Well, now they're trying to really destroy your national forests. And if you're in Western North Carolina, you've probably got more national forest around you than public lands. So I would venture to say that this is a bigger fight for you. We should fight on all these things with all of our energy, don't get me wrong, but you should really care about this. And so support those organizations, stick around because Boone will probably pass one, and we'll keep working and hopefully have a full episode for all of our wildlife lovers, but also the folks that are deeply rooted in Western North Carolina and want to see it protected. And you think about things like hurricane recovery, all of these different dynamics. We need areas that can hold water. We need areas that have unimpacted streams. We need areas of wilderness. These things all are interconnected. And healthier ecosystems and waterways means healthier and more resilient communities in the face of disasters. And that's how we started this episode today, talking about trying to recover from some of these disasters.
Yeah, dude. I think that was so well put. I think this sounds like it has the potential to have some really profound impacts for West North Carolina as we deal with the recovery from Hurricane Helene and just I think probably the generational trauma that we've now inherited because of this storm, right? Uh,
Right.
and it sounds like people have an opportunity to go and speak out against this, use your public power, right? Your power, your voice, and really push back against this and protect our beautiful parts of West North Carolina.
No, absolutely. And if you're listening and you live in a community in Western North Carolina and you go, hey, I want my local government to do a resolution, reach out to me or Mountain True. You can DM me, Dalton for Boone, on Instagram, and I'll work with you to do that and help you do that type of advocacy because we got to turn the heat up on a federal government that's not listening to its people or reflecting its values, which is really the theme of so much of the work that, Preston and I do and what we believe, which is evaluating and really highlighting the values of regular everyday folks. So, been a great episode. We talked a little bit about everything, it feels like. Started talking about hurricane recovery and new elementary school here in Watauga County. Then we talked a little bit about labor and unions, the North Carolina Democratic Party struggles currently, at least what we've seen on Facebook. Also, the right to work constitutional amendment that's coming down the pipeline. Finally, we wrapped up with the Roadless Rule conversation and teased a potential future episode with a guest. I want to plug a couple of things, right? So I'm one of your hosts, Dalton George. You can find me at Dalton for Boone, but most importantly, you can find this podcast at You Live Here Pod on Instagram and all the other social media handles, as well as Spotify, Apple, all of the little social media things out there. You should also check out my buddy Preston Blakely. He's a great dude too. Preston Blakely NC. Did I memorize your Instagram right?
Yeah, you're pretty dang close, man. Preston B_NC.
Oh no, it's so close. Then listen to that one. Don't follow whoever Preston Blakely NC is on Instagram. We don't like him. Or he can give us the handle. And then lastly, I want to shout out Beacon Media, who makes the show possible through the many ways that they support us and the excellent work they do across the state of North Carolina. This has been Do You Even Live Here? Thanks for listening, y'all, and hope you have a great day.